In this lesson, we'll continue to build upon the table which we've been working on in the previous lessons in this chapter. As you work with tables, you may find that you wish to merge cells, just like you would if you were using a spreadsheet program, where you may have data that you wish to span a horizontal or vertical width across multiple cells or multiple columns. We can do this in HTML using the call span and row span attribute. But like you would do with a spreadsheet, we have to do a little bit of accounting for our table cells so that we don't get some really bizarre results as we manipulate our table. To get started, let's arbitrarily decide that we wish to merge the cells that have the words 1, 2, 3, and 4 within them. We can do this using the call span attribute. The call span attribute will essentially tell a single instance of a TD tag, the TD tag defining our tabular data, our cell, to span 4 columns, rather than just a single column, which a single instance of a TD tag does, which we've seen in a previous lesson. Let's have a look at how that works. If we switch back over to our HTML document, we can see our opening table row contains 4 TD tags, each TD tag with a unique width and a few attributes to govern the positioning of the contents of those table cells. Now, what I want is a single TD tag to span all of the available space currently taken up by the table cells 2, 3, and 4. What we're going to do in our HTML document is delete the second, third, and fourth table cell. You can do that by positioning your mouse after the last closing TD tag and hitting the delete key, but it's a bit faster to click with your mouse button and drag until the items you want to delete are highlighted in blue, and then press the delete key on your keyboard. But now I need to modify the remaining table cell, because if I don't, my web browser is not going to understand exactly what I'm trying to do in this space. Before I do anything else, I'll save my work, switch over to my web browser and hit reload or refresh, and I can observe that the web browser is a little bit confused about what I'm trying to do, because we can see the first table cell is still in the first position where we originally specified it to be, taking up approximately 10% of the available width, but that single table cell is not spanning all of the available space. We can tell the web browser to interpret this cell such that it will span all of that space using the call span attribute. I'll come over to this table cell and I will position my mouse after the width tag so that I can press the delete key on my keyboard and delete that attribute. And instead of the width attribute, I'll type call span, COLSPAN, equals, quote, quote, and I'll type the number of table cells that I want this individual cell to horizontally span across. In this case, I want this table cell to span across all available table cells in this row, so I'll enter a value of 4. Now I'll save this file and switch back over to my web browser and hit refresh or reload. Now I can see I have one big cell and the word 1 left justified within that cell. If I were to change the align attribute in my HTML document from left to right, click Save from the File menu, switch back to the web browser and reload, I can see that the word 1 has shifted to the other side of the page. And if I come back to my HTML and change that value for the align attribute to center, and save my file, and reload or refresh, now the contents of that cell are centered, much like you'd have for a title. So that shows us how we can make cells span multiple columns. But how do we get the table cells that make up a column to merge together. Now I mentioned we have to do a little bit of accounting, and that's a good thing because I can see I created one more row than I intended to. I think I said we'd create a total of 8 rows, and I can see here that I have 9, including the one that we were just working on. So we just need to keep that in mind. It doesn't matter how many rows you have could have 30 or 2. You just have to keep in mind how many rows you have when you're working with spanning rows or columns. So, to get this column of table cells to merge together, we need to account for the number of rows that we have and decide which cells will be merged together. In this case, I have 8 rows. When I look at my first column, I can see that I have individual table cells taking up approximately 10% of the available browser width, and we arbitrarily decide, let's merge these together. Well, to do that, we'll come over and find the first table cell, in this case the first table cell being the leftmost table cell of the next row containing columns, and within that cell, here in my HTML, I'm going to add a new attribute, that being row span, and set that equal to the number of rows that I want this cell to take up. In this case, I have 8 rows. So, I'll input 8 as the value for the row span attribute on this table cell, this being the first table cell of the second row. But I'm not finished. Like I said a moment ago, we need to do some accounting, because as the rules of physics tell us, we can't have 2 objects occupying the same space at the same time. And consequently, I can't make one table cell occupy the space of 8 table cells and still have the 8 table cells there. If we look at our HTML, we're telling this first table cell to span all of the remaining rows of our table. We have 8 remaining rows, and I want this cell to span across those rows, giving me one big vertical cell. But I'm still defining those cells in my remaining rows. How do I resolve this? Fortunately, the resolution is easy. All we need to do is delete these table cells, because they are essentially being spoken for by this table cell, which we defined a moment ago and which I'm highlighting in blue, which has the row span attribute. This table cell will occupy the space currently occupied by the definitions of table cells which we defined in our table rows. So essentially, I'm going to delete these cells, and I'll position my mouse after the first cell and just hit the delete key on my keyboard. And a little bit more quickly, you can click and select with your mouse to highlight the individual HTML in question and hit the delete key on your keyboard. And I'll do that quickly now by selecting and deleting the first table cell in each of my table rows, because that table cell is essentially spoken for by the row span attribute which we added to the first instance of a table cell in that column. If I now, under the File menu, save and switch over to my browser and reload or refresh, now I can see all of those table cells in that first column are merged together.